I think demographics is a real issue where people are not having kids in a lot of countries. And very often they'll say, oh, I'll solve it with immigration. Immigration from where? If Europe has an average, or many parts of Europe have an average of 50 or 60, they're only at 50 or 60% of what's needed for replacement, or China for that matter, they're at half replacement rate. Where exactly are we going to find 600 million people to replace the ones that were never born? I think people are going to have to regard, to some degree, the notion of having kids as almost a social duty, within reason. I mean, if you can and you're so inclined, you should. Otherwise, civilization will just die, literally. In the US, the highest birth rate is in Utah. I think if you're saying what are threats to civilization, the lack of people is obviously a threat to civilization. We are going to face, in the mid part of the century, and particularly the latter part of the century, a demographic implosion, the likes of which we haven't seen, including the Black Plague.
Earth is going to face a massive population collapse over the next 20, 30 years. Massive. And this is definitely, will civilization, the question of is civilization going to die with a bang or a whimper? This would definitely be dying with a whimper. In most of Europe, Russia, Japan, Korea, Singapore, it's well below replacement. Yeah, I think the world is generally getting better. I have some concerns about advanced AI, that's a risk. If I say existential risks, I'd say super advanced AI is one, and probably the second biggest risk after that is population collapse. With the population collapse, the thing about demographics and birth rates, you know what's going to happen in 20 years because you know the birth rate last year. Yeah. It takes 20 years for a person to grow up. Yeah. So we know what the adult population is going to be 20 years from now because we know what kids were born last year. I think we have a serious issue with population collapse. That's far bigger than people realize. This the social networks and everything. The social support networks were not really set up for a high ratio of retirees to workers.
The birth rate is strongly correlated to, it's inversely correlated to wealth, inversely correlated to education, and correlated to religion. So the more religious you are, the more kids you will have. And this is true between countries and within countries. When did China ever experience a 50% reduction in its population? Never. Basically pre-writing, okay, because no one's ever written of such a thing. Even the Black Plague, Black Plagues would go through, I think that they might have demolished a quarter, but never a half. And yet Spain, birth rate of 50%. It's as though someone went through and killed half the population, or at least of the future population. There's something better happen to turn this around, because otherwise you have an inverted demographic pyramid. At this rate, the only thing that'll be left will be robots. 3 generations of 50% birth rate, 50% replacement rate, gets you to 12% of where you were. Those poor 12%, all they're going to be doing is taking care of their grandparents. Eventually there just won't be people at that rate. The human consciousness has not been around very long from an evolutionary standpoint. It's really just feels to me like there was this little light that appeared suddenly, Earth after 4.5 billion years. It's hard to say, how often does that happen? Maybe it's quite rare. In fact, it would appear to be quite rare, or they're very good at hiding. And so if it is a very rare thing, then we should take whatever actions we can to ensure its long-term survival.
It's like if you know that there's likely to be, we don't know, but there's likely to be another Dark Ages, which it seems, my guess is there probably will be at some point. I'm not predicting that we're about to enter Dark Ages, but that there's some probability that we will, particularly if there's a Third World War. Then we want to make sure that there's enough of a seed of human civilization somewhere else to bring civilization back and perhaps shorten the length of the Dark Ages. I think that's why it's important to get a self-sustaining base, ideally on Mars, because Mars is far enough away from Earth that a war on Earth, the Mars base might survive. It's more likely to survive than a moon base. But I think a moon base and a Mars base that could perhaps help regenerate life back here on Earth would be really important, and to get that done before a possible World War III. Last century we had 2 massive world wars, 3 if you count the Cold War. I think it's unlikely that we will never have another world war again. Well, if you say given enough time, will it be? Most likely, given enough time. Has been our pattern in the past. Like I really believe in the Zeroth Law, of Asimov's Zeroth Law. You take the set of actions most likely to support humanity into the future. In general, we are all much smarter than we think we are, but much less smart, dumber than we think we are, by a lot. So this tends to plague smart people. They just can't. They define themselves by their intelligence, and they don't like the idea that a machine could be way smarter than them. So they discount the idea, which is fundamentally flawed. That's the wishful thinking situation. I'm really quite close to. I'm very close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. Capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows, and the rate of improvement is exponential. We'll see this also with self-driving. NHTSA did a study on Tesla's Autopilot version 1, which is relatively primitive, and found that it was a 45% reduction in highway accidents, and that's despite Autopilot 1 being just version 1. Version 2, I think, will be at least 2 or 3 times better. I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I mean, I think one should generally err on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And therefore, there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight? This is insane. I'm not really all that worried about the short-term stuff. The things that are... like narrow AI is not a species-level risk. It will result in dislocation, in lost jobs and better weaponry and that kind of thing. But it is not a fundamental species-level risk, whereas digital superintelligence is. It's really all about laying the groundwork to make sure that if humanity collectively decides that creating digital superintelligence is the right move, then we should do so very, very carefully. This is the most important thing that we could possibly do. But I think that sustainable energy is also obviously really important. It's tautological. If it's not sustainable, it's unsustainable. The fundamental problem is that there's an unpriced externality in the cost of CO2. The market economics works very well if things are priced correctly. But when things are not priced correctly, and something that has a real cost has zero cost, then that's where you get distortions in the market that inhibit the progress of other technologies. Essentially anything that produces carbon, it puts carbon into the atmosphere, which includes rockets, by the way, so I'm not excluding rockets from this. There has to be a price. You can start off with a low price, but then that price, and then depending upon whether that price has any effect on the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, you can adjust that price up or down. But in the absence of a price, we sort of pretend that digging trillions of tons of fossil fuels from deep under the earth and putting it into the atmosphere, we're pretending that has no probability of a bad outcome. The entire scientific community is saying, obviously, it's going to have a bad outcome. Obviously, you're changing the chemical constituency of the atmosphere. So it's really up to people and governments to put a price on carbon, and then automatically the right thing happens. It's really straightforward.
We want to have multiple planets, and have some. If you can imagine some, I hesitate to use the word utopian society in the future. But if you say, well, what's the future you want? What's the future that seems, that'll be a good one? Then I think you want to have a future where we're a space-faring civilization, a multi-planet species, and we're out there exploring the stars. I think that'd be great.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
What to do in such a situation? Inform yourself and keep your financial education strong. We from the Compact Group offer our loyal subscribers a free educational portal with first-hand monetary, financial, and economic knowledge. Enter our invite-only Insider Club by clicking the link below. You will get access to first-class information far earlier than the rest. We have prepared a special deal for all our members where you can access a giant pool of Robert Kiyosaki's financial wisdom for just $1. To find out more, simply click the link below and join our Insider Club absolutely free. But there is more you can and should do. Build up several streams of income. More and more people realize that they have to take their future in their own hands, but they don't know how and where to start. We from Compact offer our Insider Club members unique opportunities. Strengthen your financial muscle and get the edge. Click the link below. Become part of our free Insider Club. No financial obligations. But there's one important thing you have to know. You have to become active. So do it now. Become active and see you on the other side.